James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting October the 29th, 2018. With Halloween falling in the middle of the week, I decided I wanted to work with one of my Halloween themed decks for the reading. Specifically, I'm going to be working with a tarot deck, and the deck is Trick or Tarot by Doug Thornsjo, and I'm pretty sure I butchered that name. So Doug, if you just happen to be watching this video, please forgive me if I pronounced your name incorrectly. And the deck is published by Duck Soup Productions. So the beautiful thing about this deck for me is that it's my first time using it because it's another new deck in my collection. But this one was gifted to me by a fellow card reader. Her name is Wishop. So Wishop, if you happen to be watching this week's video, this one is for you in part because I'm working with the deck that you were so kind to gift me with. So once again, thank you, Wishop. Wishop also has a channel right here on YouTube, so I will be leaving a link to her channel in the description box below if you want to check it out. She does wonderful things with tarot, Lenormand, playing cards, and Uno cards, as well as geomancy. So if any of those things strike your fancy, please support her and check out her channel. Again, I will be leaving the link to her channel in the description box below. So now, let's take the deck in hand. I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the cards, and as I do every week, I'm asking the cards for insight and guidance, information that will be most helpful to all of us who happen to be watching this video, whenever you happen to be watching it, for the upcoming week that will be helpful in making progress and moving throughout the week. So now I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the cards my other way. Feeling one more time this way will be good. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the cards. Now I'm going to fan the cards out, and I'm so excited because this deck fans really well. Did you see that? Alright, so I'm going to start by picking three because when I work with tarot, I usually work with three cards. I'm feeling one here on the end. That's two. And this one grabbed my attention, so that's three. And we'll see if we need to pull any additional cards going forward. But we'll start with three. So I've now taken the remainder of the deck and put it to one side. And when I work with tarot, I read the cards from left to right, unlike when I'm working with my other systems like Lenormand, Kipper, playing cards where I pull the center card. I like to read tarot from left to right. So for me, the first card opening the line up usually talks about maybe the possibility of an overall theme or situation or type of energy for the week. So we'll see what that card is. And taking a look at it, here we have, okay. Here we have the Eight of Swords. And so this week, we're being asked to consider taking a look at our mental patterns and our ways of thinking, because the Suit of Swords for me can represent mental activity, thought processes, things of that nature, the mind. So we'll be taking a look at what we think either about a situation in particular or just our life overall, you know, paying attention to the ideas that come into our minds, habitual patterns of thinking, things like that. The reason why I'm saying it like that is because the Eight of Swords, one of its meanings for me is that it can come up when we are thinking or believing, now remember about the mind, thinking or believing that we are stuck, that we are trapped, that we are limited or restricted in some way, because the image on the card has a person who's literally in a cage, right? So it's that sense of being caged, being trapped, you know, feeling like you are limited or restricted in terms of freedom, mobility, whether that's in the literal sense or the metaphorical sense, you know, ways in which we feel trapped, limited, restricted, stuck. Swords for me also represent lifestyle, and the 8 is the number of power. So this could be a week for some people about ways that you could begin thinking. Remember, and if you caught that, that was the phone ringing, which seems to happen quite often when I'm filming these videos. And so, you know, I'm a big believer that everything that happens in the experience is part of the experience. So for some people, as I was talking about this idea about limitation, restriction, being trapped, stuck, those kinds of things in terms of energy, then that phone ringing at that time was validation of that point. So what I was about to say, to elaborate on that point before the phone rang, is that swords represent lifestyle, and then the 8 represents power for me. So this could be a week where the theme overall is about reclaiming your personal power, especially in your life, in the areas in which you feel stuck, trapped, limited, restricted, or in some kind of rut. This card could come up to suggest that there may be things that are interfering with your sense of freedom, mobility, things like that. And it could just be a matter of getting to the root cause of that so you can move beyond the limitation or the sense of stuckness. The only other thing I will allow, or add, I should say, to the 8 of Swords is this. And it could be coming up to suggest that this is a period of time where we need to be thinking outside of the box. If you go with the idea that the cage represents limitation and restriction, this may be a time where you need to think outside of the box, right? There is that. So again, the 8 of Swords represents our mental patterns, habitual thinking, thought processes, things like that. It could also be about ways in which we experience or believe to be trapped, limited, stuck, those kinds of things. It could also be, you know, what do we need to do to start thinking outside the box so we can move beyond that? Again, also to taking a look at what may be interfering with your life, whether it be people, conditions, circumstances, situations that are contributing possibly or an outer manifestation of the thought processes going on in your mind about being limited, restricted, or stuck. The only other thing I will add to this, because this thought just popped in, you may be wanting to embark on a new area of your life or move into a new direction, and you may be thinking or believing that you don't know what the first step is, or you can't see your way out of your situation to start that new chapter, phase, journey, those kinds of things. If that's the case, then this would be a week for you to maybe be still. If you're in a cage, you're not moving, right? To be still and maybe meditate and contemplate on the step. And allow spirit, the divine, whatever you call that in your life, that energy, to give you a heads up, to give you some kind of clarity, those kinds of things. And I'm looking at the image on the card, and this is why I'm going there. Because in this particular image, there is a full moon. So for me, the moon symbolically represents our intuition. So you're being asked to be encouraged to be led and guided by your intuition. The only way you can really tap into that, though, is if you're still. Because I'm hearing that expression, be still and know. Right? So there is that. Now, the only other thing I will add, in keeping with what I've already said about this card, is I'm looking at the image and there's a little devil type figure that's poking at the figure in the cage. So the little devil can be symbolic of the little ways that we can maybe sabotage ourselves, trip ourselves up. We may be harboring on the mistakes that we've made. For me, the devil can symbolically represent errors or error consciousness, right? So the errors that we've made, you know, we may be getting hung up on past or prior mistakes, and as a result of that, it's keeping us stuck. It's keeping us from going forward. We can't move beyond that. So I'm seeing that. But it could just represent like the, your, for lack of a better way of putting it, your inner demons, you know, so somebody may be actually dealing with their inner demons this week. And you're doing it in a way so you can be free from them. This may be about going with the idea about being in a cage. This may be about seeking liberation from the things that bind us, the things that trap us, the things that limit and restrict us, right? So that is the Eight of Swords. Middle card is the, the Ten of Wands is the middle card. Okay, so I'm looking at the image, and the very first thing that comes to my mind is that the Ten of Wands in this particular case is about burden. So it's very interesting. We have kind of a very heavy week here with one card talking about being trapped, being stuck, limitation, restriction, that sense of your freedom, your liberation, your mobility being inhibited. And then here we have, in the image on the card, we have the character with a big bag of candy on its back. So usually this card can represent carrying around a weight, a burden, things like that. So it could just be a matter of, you may be wanting to move forward, you may be wanting to move into a new chapter or phase into your life, and you may be looking at the things that you are burdened with or burdened by, right? So there is that. You could even be considering the idea, like if you want to move forward, how much work is involved in this, because the Ten of Wands can represent a lot of work. There's a lot of work to do, right? And so much so that you could be feeling a sense of being burdened by too much work. Now, if I go to what I said in the Eight of Swords about the little devil, being the thing that we can't get beyond, maybe a prior or past mistake or error thinking, then this card would be, saying like we're feeling a sense of guilt about that. So what can we do to remove the guilt? So I'm seeing that with the Ten of Wands. For me, the biggest thing here is about moving past burdens, moving past responsibilities, moving past guilt. Now, another thing with that, because I said responsibilities, is that this card could be coming up to give you a heads up about possibly enabling other people to not assume responsibility for their own lives. And that could be another way in which you find yourself stuck, trapped, limited, or restricted. Remember, I talked about interference, right? What could be interfering with your life is your willingness to assume responsibility for other people, and in doing so, you are enabling them to not take responsibility for their own situations, conditions, circumstances, right? So how can you begin the process of relieving yourself of those burdens and those responsibilities? Because this card in that sense would represent delegation, right? So there is that. I'm feeling this because this card has a personal meaning to me. So I'm seeing in my head the idea here, for some people in particular, you may need to hear it like this. You can't be a Superman or a Superwoman to everyone. Think about that. Somebody once passed that wisdom on to me. I was in the working world, was one of my immediate supervisors, and one day he said to me, I need you to drop the cape, meaning Superman, right? Because I was one of the people who would assume a lot of responsibility in my department for people, and in doing so, I allowed people not to be responsible, not to step up. So it could just be a matter of, this is the week where you may need to take a look at if you are allowing yourself to enable other people to not be responsible for themselves. Would you be willing to start relieving yourself of that responsibility, of that burden? And here's why. The only way you can really do that, going back to the first card where I talked about meditation and contemplation, the only way you could do that would be to consider, what do you get out of doing what you're doing right now? If you're quick to assume responsibility and enable people to not be responsible for themselves, what do you get out of that? And the reason being is because the bag on the back of the character in this card is full of candy. And candy represents getting a treat, getting a reward, getting a payoff. What's the reward in that kind of activity or behavior for you? So that is the Ten of Wands this week. So now let's take a look at the final card. And here we have, here we have the Eight of Cups. So there's a there's a story going on here. All right, so here we have the Eight of Cups. So cups is the suit that represents feelings, emotions, and relationships. And you know I went on and on with the Ten of Wands about assuming responsibilities and enabling other people to not be responsible for themselves. Well, that context is all about relationships with other people, right? And here's why I'm coming back to that. The Eight of Cups in particular is about moving on. This is a card that represents a search for meaning. It's, for me, in this deck, or in tarot, generally speaking, it's the minor arcana version to the Hermit card. And the Hermit card, if you are familiar with tarot, is a major arcana card, and one of its chief meanings is search for wisdom and enlightenment. I liken that card to the Eight of Cups. So on a minor scale, or in a more mundane way, this card can represent a departure, search for meaning. It's a travel card, so this just represents going places, whether that's literal or metaphorical. But also attached to this card is that it's time to take a look at our relationships or conditions, circumstances, or situations in which we feel are no longer serving and supporting us. This card in that context can represent unhealthy situations, conditions, relationships, and we are now realizing it is time to detoxify, because sometimes this card can represent things becoming toxic. So detoxify and allowing us to metaphorically flush those things out of our system so we can move on. If you notice, we have the number 8 repeating twice. We had it with the Eight of Swords, now we have it with the Eight of Cups. So 8 is a highlighting number here. And again, it's all about personal power. This is a week where it's about reclaiming your personal power. But first, the only way you can reclaim it is to first be clear on where do you give your power away. And then, once you realize where you give it away, why do you give it away? What do you get out of giving your power away? How does that serve and support you? And I know every time I pose this question in a challenging situation or dynamic, most people say, there's nothing I get out of it. But I'm a big believer in that we are all engaged in behaviors, habits, and tendencies because as human beings we're motivated by some form of self-interest and we get something out of it. It doesn't matter what the appearance of the habit, tendency, or behavior is, there's a reward, there's a benefit, there's a payoff to it, or else we wouldn't engage in it. So this is the week to really become clear on where you give your power away, why do you do it? And then once you become aware of why that is there a better way of having that need met? Because you're identifying an unmet need, right? And then you have to ask yourself, is there a better way that I can have this need met than through this behavior, habit, and tendency that is no longer serving and supporting me? It did for a time, but now you may be at a stage in your journey in life where that's no longer the case, and you're realizing enough is enough. And yes, I'm hearing the old disco song, Enough is Enough by Donna Summer and Barbara Streisand in my head. So for some people, you may get to the place where enough is enough, right? If you're feeling stuck, going back to the very first card, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling trapped, if you're feeling limited and restricted, if you're feeling burdened, going over to the second card, you may need to get to the place where you are literally sick and tired of that dynamic. You know, sometimes I'm seeing the expression in my head like I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? So for some people, you may need to get to that point for you to move on. And then you realize that the situation, the circumstance, the relationship isn't healthy. And then you have to say, I have to be the one to make the step to move into a healthier pattern, a healthier habit, a healthier tendency, right? You have to say, I am worth it in order to do so. So that is the Eight of Cups. So again, I'm feeling like this is a week where we're being asked to take a look at our sense of personal power, you know, reclaiming that, finding ways in which we give it away, in which we feel stuck, limited, or restricted, that right there is possibly a position of being powerlessness, right, or helpless. And so it could just be a matter of how can we reframe our thinking so we move from stuck thinking and creating a prison of our own making in our minds, and how can we liberate ourselves and move beyond that. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and close this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a tarot-tastic week, one that's filled with lots of treats and not so many tricks. Take care.